Folks, this week we are talking about forgiveness. And if you're all like me, raise your hand. Forgiveness is really hard, especially when people have really hurt you. In the Bible, there's a story about this guy named Peter. He was one of Jesus' disciples, and somebody must have really offended Peter. Somebody must have done something that really hurt him. Because there's this story about how Peter turned to Jesus and he asked him this question. He asked Jesus, how many times must I forgive my neighbor? How many times? And here's the thing about that question. Peter's question reveals a problem. It's a problem that Peter had. You see, Peter, and let's be honest, all of us, we believe that forgiveness is for the sake of the offender, the one who's hurt us. We believe that forgiveness is for the sake of the person who's offended us because they have taken something from us, right? We have this idea when somebody's offended us that I am the victim and they owe me something. They owe me something. And so we wait until they pay us back. You see, we have this idea that when I forgive someone, it's for their sake. And as Christian people, we often do this. We say you ought to forgive someone. And this fact is revealed by our response to that. In our heads, we say, well, why should I forgive them? Why should I do them the favor? You see, we have this idea that forgiveness is for the sake of the offender. Well, Peter has some confusion, and I think we do too. Because Jesus, when Peter asked that question, how many times must I forgive them? He says 7 times, to which Jesus, I imagine with a smirk on his face, turns to Peter and says, how about 77 times? And then Jesus goes on to tell this story about this king. He has servants, and he wants to settle his accounts with his servants. And he has a servant who owes him 10,000 talents. Now, 10,000 talents is the equivalent of millions of dollars. There's absolutely no way that servant could pay back his master. But that servant says, please, master, please, would you just have some patience for me? I can do it. Just give me time. To which the king does something interesting. He turns to that servant and he has mercy on that servant. Get this, he forgives the debt that servant owes. He cancels the debt, and that servant is free from that debt that was held over his head. The funny thing is, Jesus doesn't stop the story there. Jesus goes on to tell that this servant ran into another servant, and this other servant owed the first servant a debt, owed him several talents or whatnot. And do you know what the original servant did to that servant who owed him? He had him thrown in jail, thrown in prison for not paying back that debt. To which the king, the master, runs into that original servant again and says to him, come on, what are you thinking? And to that, the king responds. He responds with these words. Then the master called the servant in. You wicked servant, he said, I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant, just as I had mercy on you? In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. Ouch. This is how Jesus said, this is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. Here's what's interesting about that story. The king, when he cancels the debt of that servant, what happens to that servant? That servant is freed. But when that servant refuses to cancel the debt, to forgive the debt of the other servant, what happens? It leads to his destruction. Now, Jesus' words here are rather threatening, rather ominous. I mean, your heavenly Father will treat you each just the same way unless you forgive. It's rather threatening. But I wonder if Jesus is saying, you must forgive. You must figure this out. Because Jesus knows that for us to refuse to forgive, well, it's like hitting the self-destruct button on your life. It's like holding on to anger, holding on to resentment, holding on to all that ill will. It's going to destroy us. It's going to eat us alive. You know that. When somebody has wronged you and you refuse to let go, it just eats at you again and again and again. And I know Jesus' words here seem sort of threatening, but think about it this way. At our house, we have a whole lot of Halloween candy this year. I don't know if it's maybe because we didn't do trick-or-treating and we just bought all kinds of candy, but we've got this big tub above our fridge, and we pull that tub down every once in a while. And here's what I know, if we didn't put limits on it, our kids would devour every piece of candy in that tub in one sitting. But instead, we put limits. And here's what I know, my kids think we're a little bit mean, a little bit strict, actually a whole lot mean and a whole lot strict because we don't let them to have at it. But here's what you and I know, it's not good for them. And so we're strict with them. We say, there's only so much candy tonight. You see, we say it because we know best. And here's what I know, we have a God who knows what's best for us, even to the point that this God says to you, you must figure out how to forgive, or it's going to hurt you. You see, forgiveness isn't for the sake of the offender, to be honest. Forgiveness is for our sake, us who have been wronged. Until we figure out how to let go, it'll eat us alive. And God knows this. And so God says, you must. Let me give you a gift of freedom. Folks, if you know somebody who's struggling with forgiveness, or somebody's offended them, or they're just hurting because of what someone else did to them and they're holding on, would you invite them to tune in, maybe share this post with them? And also, if you're watching on YouTube, go ahead and hit subscribe, hit the bell so you get notifications. Or if you're watching on cable access, maybe, just maybe, you'll invite a friend to watch with you tomorrow. Have a good one.
Be the light in the cracks. Be the one that's mending the camel's back. Slow to anger, quick to laugh. Be more heart and less attack. Be the wheels, not the track. Be the wanderer that's coming back. Leave the past right where it's at. Be more heart and less attack. More you take, less you have, 'cause it's you in the mirror staring back. Quick to let go, slow to react. Be more heart, less attack. Ever growing steadfast, and if need be, the one that's in the gap. Be the never turning back. Twice the heart any man could have.
Stuck my head out, I caught the raindrops, I drank the water, I felt my veins pop. I'm nearly sanctified, I'm nearly broken. down the river. I'm near the open. I stuck my head out. I caught the raindrops. I drank the water. I felt my veins pop. I'm nearly sanctified. I'm nearly broken. I'm down the river. I'm near the open. I'm down the river to where I'm going. The track, be the wanderer that's coming back. Leave the past right where it's at.